Today we are going to be discussing the myofascial lines. First up, we have the superficial front line. The superficial front line attaches the parts of the body, specifically the anterior, in two parts, starting from the toes up to the pelvis, and then the pelvis up to the head. The superficial front line works with the superficial back line to create balance in the body. When the two work together, it gives parts of the body much more range of motion. The superficial front line supports the pubis, ribcage, and face when they go further than the gravity line. The superficial front line protects the front of the body with its myofascia. It begins at the top of each toe, climbs up the tibia to the patella, runs up the rectus femoris to the anterior inferior iliac spine, up the rectus abdominis to the fifth rib, hitting the sternocleidomastoid fascia, the sternomandrium, and the sternocleidomastoid, and ending at the mastoid process. The superficial front line is responsible for hip flexion, knee extension, and dorsal flexion. Movements that involve the superficial front line are touching your toes while lying down. In order to make it harder, you can touch your toes while standing up. The second myofascial line we are going to discuss is the superficial back line. The superficial back line connects all the posterior of the body. It is all connected in different parts, the toes to the knees and the knees up to the brow. The superficial back line helps keep the body straight by working against the superficial front line and prevent extension of the body. Due to this, the muscles have many more slow twitch fibers. The superficial back line's route through the body begins at the frontal brow ridge, down the scap fascia to the occipital ridge, and then the sacrolumbar fascia. The superficial back line runs to the ischial tuberosity, then the hamstring condyles of the femur, down the gastrocnemius and Achilles tendon, then the calcaneus, and then finally the plantar surface of the toes. It is responsible for flexion of the knees, hyperextension, and plantar flexion. Movements that would use the superficial back line would be the cobra, and to make the movement easier, one would just have to do the cobra on their elbows rather than fully extending their arms. The third myofascial line is the lateral line. The lateral line is important for stability of the frontal plane. It is the reason the left and right sides of the body are balanced and that people aren't leaning to one side over the other. When the upper body is moving, the lateral line ensures that the limbs are stable. It begins at the occipital ridge, down the sternocleidomastoid, to the clavicle and manubrum, then to the fourth thoracic vertebrae, then to the external and internal intercostals, then through the ribs to the lateral abdominal obliques and the iliac crest, and then to the gluteus maximus, which then goes to the tensor fasciae latae, and then we go through the abductor muscles, the lateral tibial condyle, and then to the head of the fibula, through the fibularis muscles, and finally the first and fifth metatarsals. The lateral line makes eversion of the foot happen, as well as abduction of the neck, hip, and trunk. Some movements that involve the lateral line is a yoga pose called Trinca Konasana. The last myofascial line we're going to talk today about is the spiral line. The spiral line snakes around the body, wrapping it in a double spiral. The spiral line helps balance out the frontal, transverse, and sagittal planes of the body. The spiral line helps with rotation of the body. It starts at the mastoid process to the splenius capitis and the cervix, then to the cervical thoracic spinous processes, then to the rhomboids and the medial border of the scapula, to the serratus anterior, to the lateral ribs, and then the external oblique, then to the linea alba, to the internal oblique, then the iliac crest, then to the tensor fasciae latae, to the tibial condyle, and then to the tibialis anterior, to the fibularis, to the bicep femoris, ending at the ischial tuberosity. Movements of the spiral line are any rotation of the body, and a movement using the spiral line would be hula hooping. And finally, we're going to talk about the back functional line and the front functional line. What is unique about the back functional line and the front functional line is that they are rarely used when standing. What they are used for mostly is during physical activities, for example, soccer or football or any of those sports where you aren't always completely balanced and all of your limbs are going in any direction. The front functional line and the back functional line are used for when the body is ever changing to give it extra stability.